Um, let's start with Trump's 100 days. Of course, he's very
Mm.
positive, but to be honest, I would say he's it's not that great of 100 days because his latest poll number is pretty bad. Um, and the fourth quarter GDP is negative 0.3%. Okay. And now, of course, if you listen to Peter Navarro, so this is what Peter Navarro said. So that's the best negative print I've ever seen in my life. And the markets need to look beneath the surface of that. When you strip out the inventories and the negative effects of the surge in imports because of the tariffs, you had 3% growth. So even in that very positive statement, he admitted the negative effects of the tariffs. So that tells you,
Yeah.
how bad it is. And then in terms of the tariffs, the other thing is the White House posted their celebration 100 day, and in there they listed all the senators and the Congress, prominent people who are congratulate him. Not a single
Mm.
word of tariff was mentioned. You hear them, oh,
Mm.
congratulations, this is the best of 100 days, blah, blah. Nobody ever mentioned the tariffs, which is very odd. If you think about his 100 days, that's a big part of his 100 days, and nobody mentions tariffs. Now, isn't that enough to tell you that people are very unsettled, including people from his own party, are not very happy about tariffs? Can we say that?
You're absolutely correct. You are completely right. By the way, what you said about Peter Navarro's absolutely inane comment is absolutely right. In fact, can I just say, I mean, you have very high forensic skills, Sophia. It's the kind of thing that lawyers are good at spotting. That what you're saying is actually nonsense, and well, if you'd ever wanted to become a lawyer, you obviously have the qualities for one, because you're absolutely correct. Finding a positive in this, that everybody was in a panic and rushed out and buy goods in a tremendous hurry, because they're worried about what's going to happen when the tariffs come into place, and seeing this as a positive is grotesque. It is ludicrous. It does suggest that there's been, as one might expect, heavy stockpiling in the United States, but it also suggests great uncertainty and great fear, and it points to a significant deteriorating picture going forward. And you're absolutely right. I mean, chorus of praise for the president and his achievements. I But nobody wants to talk about tariffs because, of course, tariffs are a massive embarrassment. And I'm going to say this: I think this has been a disastrous 100 days. I get the sense that this presidency is falling apart, actually, about which I am not happy. I mean, I didn't like Biden at all. I hope that this would mark a change for the better. I think Trump has had some good ideas. I think some of the work that Doge has done has been interesting, but I think ultimately everything that Trump has set out to do is going wrong, because he has gone about everything in completely the wrong way. And everything, you can see what the thread is, which shows why he is going wrong. Because instead of taking a collaborative approach to solve problems, going to China, meeting with Xi Jinping, saying, look, we have this trade imbalance. It's creating major problems for me politically in the Midwest. We need to start rebuilding our industries. Let's see whether we can find a way forward. So I'm trying to do something like that. Or if you want to try moving towards tariffs, I've discussed how that could be done. But, still talk to Xi Jinping. Instead of sending your envoy to Moscow to discuss, look, we understand that your army is advancing in Ukraine every single day. What can we do that would persuade you to stop? What does Trump do? He comes up with plans of his own. He doesn't put them to the other side. He says, this is it. You take it or leave it. I'm going to increase tariffs on you to first 20%, 10%, and then 20%, and then 54%, and then 125%, and then 145%, and then 245% on some goods, and call you all sorts of terrible things. He says to the Russians, and this is my plan. You take it or leave it, and if you don't, I'll impose all these secondary sanctions on you. And of course, the result of all of that is that nobody's prepared to help him. Nobody's able to help him. And everything starts to go wrong. Absolutely. As you would expect it would.
Now, the other day I was reading, the Chinese emperor has a long tradition. Whichever emperor we're talking about, majority of them has a long tradition, which is they will take lessons once they become emperor. I mean, they take lessons when they were the crown prince, but then once they become the emperor, the Huangdi, they will continue to take lessons, history lessons, which is very important part of their daily routine. I find that's a very good habit. I wonder whether Trump needs something like that to have some regular history lessons. So, for example, now before he's going to take a huge policy on tariffs, which is a big thing, right? That these tariff policies is a huge deal. Before he make a decision like that, talk to some historians about tariffs in the United States history and around the world, throughout the human history. What does tariff do, and what's the pros and cons? Do you think he needs some history lessons and somebody who he can discuss these things to discuss before he make a decision to learn from the Chinese emperor?
Well, can I first of all tell you something, which is just about, since you brought up the fact that the Huangdi used to get history lessons. This is what I'm going to say is not controversial. There is no nation on earth that has a better narrative of history than China. I mean, the records, Chinese records, are exceptional. I mean, you have the dynastic histories that go back to the time of the Qin dynasty. You have records that go back before then, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the Bamboo Annals, all of these. No country has that sense of history that China does, and which, by the way, informs everything that its political leaders do. And that sense of history gives China that sense of statecraft which it possesses. And it's obviously there are many other factors as well, but the very fact that the Chinese have this sense of history explains a huge amount about how they conduct their foreign policy and their diplomacy, and many of the other things they do domestically as well, and why they're well informed and judged in the way that they are. I'm afraid in the West it is completely different, and no more so than in the United States, because I originally trained, as you may know, as a historian. I mean, that is my first and greatest love. But history has never been taken very seriously anywhere in the West. And it is completely downplayed now. I mean, it is hardly taught in British schools anymore, something I find astonishing, but it is true. And as for Americans, they never exist in historical time. They exist always in the present. And when they have history, it is purely, propaganda and Hollywood and all of that. So you have had this absolutely idiotic comment on Truth Social from Trump today, which says that the United States won the Second World War all by itself. It played far and away the most important role. Nobody else played any significant role in it whatsoever. And he's able to write all of that on Truth Social. And nobody across the United States, the political class in the United States, political class in Europe, don't say that is completely ridiculous. What are you talking about? I mean, he's able to do it. So, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. He should have. When you make a decision like this of this kind, a massive decision to change the entire trade policy of the United States, obviously you sit down, you research it, you consult with experts, you talk it through, and go through all the modeling, do all the modeling, and you might even test it out in some places. I mean, you do the kind of thing that I can tell you for an absolute fact China absolutely does do. And obviously you inform yourself about protectionism in the past, as you said, its strengths, its weaknesses, its successes, its failures, about the approach to protectionism that they had, especially in the United States, which is the exemplar country in this. But of course, in America today, Donald Trump, expect him to do something like that? Of course not. He never will. He will never understand that. That's absolutely not what he does. He knows a little bit about William McKinley. And as you know, as everybody knows, the most dangerous people are those who know a little about something and assume that because of that, they know an awful lot.
Yeah. Now, some Republicans are now very worried about the midterm, even though it's still long, but there are people who are, they see their own poll numbers are very on the margin, and they're afraid that by the time we get to the midterm, the negative effect of the tariffs will become reality. And so one sign you can see is that Rand Paul, even though he himself is safe, but he's as a libertarian, he just doesn't like these kind of thing in principle. So he proposed a law, but it failed. It's failed, interesting, 49-49. Basically, what he's doing is to take back this emergency declaration of emergency. That's when Trump could issue executive order for the tariffs. It's supposed to go through the Congress when you have tariffs put in place, but he declared emergency. And then that's how he put in executive order to order this tariff. So Rand Paul was trying to take that away from him, but it failed in the Congress. There were 3, I think, Republicans was voting with the Democrats on this, and one of the sponsor actually is Rand Paul, who is a Republican. So that's just give you an idea. I mean, do you feel that the Republicans are as a party, are actually very unsettled about this whole thing?
I think they're absolutely terrified, but they're also terrified of Donald Trump. This is the trouble. The point is that the Republican Party, most of them, the establishment wing of the party, didn't like Donald Trump when he was first elected, and they did everything they possibly could to bring him down. And to their astonishment and dismay, he came back and he won the election. And his opponents within the Republican Party have been marginalized and defeated, people like Mitch McConnell. And so every Republican says to himself, look, I can see that this is leading us to an absolute disaster. But if we break with Donald Trump now, he's still got enormous support behind him. He's also a political leader who never forgets and is vindictive. And, this could be as damaging for us as, breaking with him might be. And I suspect that what's going on at the moment in Washington is that there's lots of anguished conversations going on, in the corridors, in the bars and restaurants and all sorts of places, in the hotel rooms, as people ask themselves, what are we going to do? Because the worry is if they wait too long, then it's going to be too late, and the midterms will be upon them, and the economic damage will become irretrievable. But what they also fear is if they move too soon, then it will backfire hideously in political terms on them. Trump will pick them off and say, look, you're traitors to the cause, and they'll be humiliated and all of that sort of thing. Rand Paul is very unusual because he's always stood outside the mainstream. He's never given me the impression of being a political leader who is ambitious to become someone important in politics in the way that so many of the others are. And that gives him great power. He is also right, by the way. This use of emergency rules that were created about 50 years ago in order to basically legislate tariffs is a massive violation of US constitutional principles. Congress clearly has the power, the sole power under the Constitution to impose tariffs of this kind. And the fact that Congress itself is sitting on its hands and letting this catastrophe play out tells you so much about the state of American politics today.
One thing I also noticed that they overall, I think both parties, they pay a lot more attention to big companies. I know some small and medium-sized business owners, and the past few days it just happened I talked to some of them. They were all worried. They really are, and nobody seems to care about them. There has been report,
No.
for example, Walmart, Target, and Home Depot, they had a meeting with Trump in the White House. And after that, it's reported in China that all these companies contacted their suppliers in China and told them to resume making and shipping goods to the United States. And they said, let us take care of the tariffs. You just ship them. Well, make people wonder whether Trump give them some exemptions or some words of something that their goods will be okay to come. But that will only punish this medium and small size business because they don't have the Trump year, right? And even if you look at the reports, the media, they would report like a UPS is cutting 20,000 jobs due to tariffs. It's bad. At the same time, majority of the jobs, 2/3 of jobs in the United States are created by small and medium-sized companies. And nobody even talking about these companies are suffering now. I mean, it is serious when I'm talking to them. Don't you think?
You're absolutely right. And I'm going to make a guess that the people who run those companies were amongst the people who were probably most likely to vote for Donald Trump. I'm guessing that these kind of people are, as people who run businesses tend to be, on the conservative side, on the Republican side. I mean, I don't want to, say everybody's like that, but I suspect that a significant number are. So this is his own electoral base that is being affected by all of this. But you're absolutely correct. But, if I may say so, this isn't just a problem with Trump. It's a problem with politics in the West altogether. As the political systems have atrophied, as political parties across the West have ceased to function as political parties, the contacts, the conveyor system that used to exist, whereby concerns at the bottom are passed through the system upwards to the people at the highest levels, doesn't exist any longer. Now, I don't know enough about China, so here I may be completely wrong, but I do know how it worked in the Soviet Union, which is that if there were problems in the Soviet Union, people used to go to their local party committee and say, we have these problems, and it would be sent upwards. And of course, what eventually happened was that because the system atrophied at the top, people didn't listen. But I mean, there was anyway a mechanism there to transmit information upwards. And I suspect in China, it not only exists, but it is much more highly developed than it was in the Soviet Union at any time. That, it's probably not just local party committees, but all kinds of other agencies. That I know that China is very, very rich in these transmission belts, if you like. But in the West, they barely exist any longer. I mean, political parties, their membership has collapsed. Their support base has collapsed. And, the chambers of commerce, all of these things, as you rightly say, they've been overshadowed by these giant plutocratic, oligarchic monopolies, which are just able to monopolize all the attention because they have the money. They're the donor class.
You're right. The Chinese government pays a lot of attention to all people of all levels. Small business, absolutely. They actually have polls all the time, and they have focus groups. They have discussions with focus groups like constantly. And then for individuals, for citizens, they are every city has their own hotlines, and you can call anytime, and just even report, for example, okay, here's a road that needs some
Yeah.
repair, so stuff like that. And they do get repaired,
I've never heard of anything like that anywhere in Europe, I should say. I mean, the idea of a hotline, cities operating hotlines. So, you got a problem, you can call the hotline and get something repaired. I mean, tell that to people in Britain. They'd just be astonished. But anyway, carry on. I interrupted you.
Well, that's what my parents told me. They said, that if
Yeah.
there's some places
Yeah.
that they have
No,
a
I'm sure it's true.
yeah, so
I,
so
I,
I mean, you
I,
see the
I'm,
results. Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
Absolutely. I'm absolutely sure that's true. I have no doubt that is absolutely right. But, that isn't how the West works anymore.
yeah.
The idea of calling hotlines. I mean, the National Health Service in Britain has a hotline,
Hmm.
which I have to call every so often whenever there's problems with my children. And I wait about a day to get a reply. I'm not exaggerating.
Uh,
And the reply invariably is go to your local hospital and queue up
uh,
for another 5 hours with your child. That's how hotlines, not just in Britain, by the way, but certainly across Europe, actually work. So, I
mm,
mean, this is a completely different thing. But but going back to your main point,
mhm.
it's absolutely true. We have a situation, certainly in the United States and definitely in Europe, where it is now privileged insiders who have access to government, and they invariably from big industries, big business,
Yeah.
and outsiders don't have any access at all.
India and Pakistan. So Modi gave Indian military free hand to act. Um, what does that mean? And then Pakistan also claimed it has credible intelligence that India will strike within 36 hours. That was like a day ago. Pakistan
Yeah.
reported said that. Um, what's your take on that? Are they just the rhetoric or
Well, Well, you anticipated what I was going to say. I hope that is just rhetoric,
okay?
because to say to tell your military in a confrontation with another power, which is a nuclear power,
Mhm.
that they have a free hand to do whatever they like. I think that is incredibly reckless. I mean, this absolutely requires political leadership, and what ought to happen is that Modi ought to be in contact with his opposite numbers in Islamabad. He ought to be calling the Prime Minister and President of Pakistan. There ought to be even a meeting between them, actually, to see whether this whole situation can be brought under control. But we are still, I think, very much at the stage of rhetoric. And the danger is that the rhetoric might get out of control
Mhm.
with terrible consequences, which I hope we won't see.
But they both are under a lot of pressure from their own country, right? That's the hard part I find lots of times is even though maybe none of them really want to
No question.
get into a real hot war, but they both are under a lot of a tremendous amount of pressure, right?
I'm afraid that is absolutely correct. I mean, I've done some programs on the Duran on my own channel um, about this, and I tried to be as factual and as even-handed as I could. The anger that was directed at me from people on each side, each blaming me with siding with the other, was just extraordinary.
Now, I heard that there was some fight even break out between India and Pakistan in Britain. The people who are living
Oh
there, they're
yeah.
fight. Okay. So, okay.
I'm afraid that's absolutely true. I mean, we have a big Indian community, and we
Uh-huh.
have a very, very much bigger Pakistani community,
Okay.
and they are distinct from each other, unfortunately. And they tend to support different politics, and
Mhm.
they're not friendly with each other, and these things do blow up.
Okay. BRICS foreign minister, they had a meeting in Brazil, but they failed to issue a joint statement. It seems there is a disagreement over the language related to reform the UN Security Council. So apparently,
Yeah,
Brazil, India, and South Africa, I guess they have long time ambition to join, I guess, the Security Council. But to put it into into the joint statement, Egypt and Ethiopia, I think they are much against that, to put it. They don't think BRIC is a good place to push something like that. What's your take on that?
I agree with I agree with Egypt and Ethiopia. I mean, this is not. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, BRICS, what it needs to focus on is trade and developing the trade system that's all about at the moment. That is the priority. Security Council reform can wait, and the reason I say that is because there cannot be Security Council reform anyway, unless the Western powers basically ease their opposition to it. The Western powers are utterly opposed to Security Council reform because they have a entrenched superiority on the Security Council, which is a leftover from the Second World War. I mean, it's absurd that Britain and France are both permanent members of the Security Council, and a country like India or a country like Brazil is not. I have a lot of sympathy for their position, but getting into debates about this issue until this issue of the West, it changes, it is a waste of time and energy. The country that India, Brazil, and South Africa should be talking to is first and foremost the United States. India, one time, by the way, was treated in a most humiliating way, because I remember this was during Obama's time. Their representative, it was India's turn to have its ambassador on the Security Council as a non-permanent member. And Obama was saying, no, we're going to keep an eye on what you do and how you vote. And we treat this as a lesson to see whether you are qualified for Security Council membership. This is the United States. I mean, treating India, a country, of millennial civilization, as, a pupil that must, tick off the exam questions set by the teacher. It was absolutely preposterous. But that is where the problem lies.
We talked about this before. I think both France and Britain, they are not going to give up their seats there. Absolutely not.
No.
In the meantime, I also think that, for example, part of the reason Egypt and Ethiopia object to it is South Africa, I guess, assumed that they should be join the UN Security Council to represent Africa. I'm not sure Egypt and Ethiopia agrees to that South Africa should be the country to represent Africa. The same with Brazil. Now, Brazil assumed that it's the largest country in South America, so Brazil should be the representative. But Brazil is the only country that speaks Portuguese. Rest of the South America, they speak Spanish. Okay. I'm not sure other countries would agree, just Brazil, you can represent us. I think it's probably more complicated than just the Western power won't give up their seats. For that reason, we talked about this, it's probably best to keep it as it is. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if there is a consensus on Security Council reform, then we can move forward with it. And then we can start to look at all of these various issues. There is no such consensus at the moment. It's not just that the British and the French will never give up their rights to be permanent members. They do not want additional members at all, because if they are additional members, then Britain and France's position in the world will become diluted, and they will no longer be considered important countries any longer. And as far as the West is concerned, the West will lose its inbuilt majority on the Security Council. The way the Security Council works is that you have 3 permanent members who are, of course, Western. You have elections to appoint other representatives from other regions. Europe is one. So you always get, in fact, I think you get 2 more European states. So from 3 it immediately becomes 5. And then you're able to manipulate votes in all sorts of other places. And you're able eventually to get almost always a pro-Western majority on the Security Council. It may not reflect the setup in the General Assembly, but that is how the Security Council works. If you start introducing new members like India, Brazil, South Africa, or others, then they will not have that inbuilt majority any longer. So this is where the opposition from the West comes. Now, as to what you might do, I've seen all kinds of suggestions made. I mean, Brazil and India are very big countries. On that strength alone, maybe they should be Security Council members. But you could have organizations like the African Union and ASEAN and the Arab League, maybe, and the Organization of American States or whatever. Maybe they should have members. But, these are not issues to discuss now. You have to, first of all, agree to reform the Security Council, and we are nowhere close to that point. Having these discussions now is a complete waste of time. All that it does, as you rightly say, is it creates divisions and disagreements over something that is purely hypothetical.
I agree, yeah. Anyway, it's a little bit surprising because it's the meeting is in Brazil. You would think they would want to see a successful meeting, right? So fail to have a joint statement is not very successful. And yet Brazil is the one who apparently sent an even letter to Egypt about this. And Egypt said, no, we're not going along with that kind of language, something like that. It's a little bit surprising, I think.
No, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think this is very much the character of President Lula, who has a very, very high opinion of himself. I mean, I'm not, hostile to him. I think he's done many fine things, and I think he's been perhaps the most successful president of Brazil that, well, at least I can remember. But I mean, he does have faults, shall we say, as a diplomat.
But Wang Yi and Lavrov, they had a meeting. I thought that meeting went pretty well. What do you think?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, quite apart from anything else, not only do the Russians and the Chinese have this very strong strategic partnership now, but I mean, it's absolutely clear that the two men consider each other friends. I mean, so there is this personal chemistry between them that means that they're able to work well together, which, even between friendly countries doesn't always happen. You may have two countries which are very friendly to each other, but their foreign ministers might not have that kind of chemistry. But clearly Lavrov and Wang Yi do. I mean, they really clearly like and respect each other a great deal. I personally believe, and this is my own view, that the Chinese-Russian strategic partnership is going to move on and move forward. Again, I had a very difficult conversation with some British person. He says, well, don't you understand that all that's happening is that China is taking over Russia and Russia is becoming part of Greater China? And the point I always say to these people is, first of all, that isn't true anyway. But if that is what is happening, if that really were what is happening, well, the Chinese are doing it in an extremely, in a way that is extremely clever and doesn't hurt Russian self-respect and dignity. Whereas what you really want to do is to take over Russia. And the people who are really trying to make Russia into a vassal state and a satellite are yourselves.
Yeah, the Europeans, they would love to.
By the way, Russians, exactly. The Russians say this both about China and the West all the time. I mean, they understand this very, very well. Remember, they had to deal with the Americans.
Yeah, the Europeans would love to first divide Russia, right, into, I think they even had a map, like 6 states or something, and then gradually control. That's guess the purpose to divide that is to conquer, right? So you can conquer one after another. I guess that's the plan.
Exactly.
So they are I'm sure one of the things they talk about is this May 9th Victory Day celebration for the 80 years anniversary. What is interesting to me is that they invite many countries. One is Israel. I would think Israel would be should be interested in coming, but Netanyahu already said he's not
Yeah,
coming. Uh, I
yeah.
always find I mean, why? What's the problem for, of all the countries, I really think Israel should come. Wouldn't you think? And yet he's not coming.
Oh, absolutely. Well, indeed, though he has, of course, attended the celebrations before,
Mhm.
so he's not coming this time. Though he did attend on earlier years, but anyway, I mean, we all know why. I mean, he realizes if he goes, the Europeans will criticize him, and he's angry with the Russians because they've been criticizing what he's been doing in Gaza and all of that sort of thing. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, given what is being commemorated,
Yeah.
which was a victory in which Russia made, sorry, Donald Trump, far and away the biggest contribution, if you're talking about Germany,
Mhm.
and that it was through that victory that the Jewish people were saved because
Yeah.
they were. I mean,
Yeah.
at least in, yeah, it is quite wrong for the Prime Minister of Israel, of all countries,
Mhm.
not to attend such a celebration at this time. But there it is.
And also Ukraine and the US signed a mineral deal. So finally they signed this deal.
Yeah.
Now, whatever in there, we put
Mm.
that aside. I'm curious of your view, what they achieve here. Does that mean that US now is going to continue to support Ukraine to continue to fight? Or does it mean Ukraine now is more flexible, giving up possibly giving up their demand and start seriously negotiating with Russia? What does that mean, this deal?
I see absolutely no sign of Ukraine giving up reducing their position or showing any sign of being prepared to negotiate with Russia. I mean, there's actually they passed a law
Uh-huh.
prohibiting themselves from doing it,
Mhm.
and they show no willingness at all. They won't entertain any suggestion of setting that law aside. So I don't see any sign Ukraine is prepared to withdraw from Russia, enter into negotiations, enter into direct negotiations with Russia. The Russians have proposed it many, many times. Now, the way this all began was that Zelensky first proposed this idea to Trump
Mhm.
back in August, September, in order to get continued Western American aid. He wanted the Americans in return for the Ukrainians conceding rights on strategic resources to the US. He wanted in return the United States to give Ukraine a security guarantee. In other words, to enter into an alliance with Ukraine.
Mhm.
Um, the Americans categorically refused, and this agreement contains no such provision. I've read it, by the way. But in return for that, the Americans have watered down very considerably some of their demands that they were previously making on Ukraine. So what they've done is they've created an investment vehicle to develop these resources in Ukraine. But of course, it's all a complete scrap of paper because it can only function if there is peace in Ukraine,
Mhm.
of which there is absolutely no sign. So the Americans, on the one hand, are saying, well, this shows to the Russians that, we've got skin in the game, that we're there, that we're involved. Um, whether that means continued US arms supplies to Ukraine at this moment in time is completely uncertain. The US continues to supply arms to Ukraine at the moment, but the authorizations that existed apparently run out in about 6 months' time. Whether at that point Trump is prepared to go back to Congress and seek more funding or exercise his own drawdown authority, I doubt that even he knows at
Mhm.
this moment.
Mhm.
It doesn't seem as if he's very keen to do that. But perhaps it could lead there. I think this is a very bad agreement, by the way,
Mhm.
both for the Americans and for the Ukrainians, as unworkable agreements always are.
What's the whole point of having this agreement? I mean, what do they really? It's not clear to me why Trump is so eager to get this agreement, and why Zelensky think this is good idea, just giving up your mineral rights and this and that for a long time and just giving American without getting any guarantee of any sort in return. I don't quite get it. What's the whole point?
Right. Right, I think this. I think you've actually put your finger on it because neither side got what they wanted. The Ukrainians didn't get their security guarantee. The Americans weren't able to do their a smash and grab raid on Ukrainian resources. So neither really likes the agreement that they have. But if there had been no agreement at all, it would have signaled that the entire relationship between the United States and Ukraine had completely broken down
Mhm.
because there's been so much talk about this. And I think that neither the Americans nor the Ukrainians were prepared to accept that. So for that reason, they patched up something together, which is what we now have.
But use that as a way to show the world that they're still good friends and
That they're
still
still
having, okay,
that they're still good friends.
okay.
Exactly. That they're still good friends. But as I said, it doesn't satisfy the core objectives of either side. I mean, it's pointless. It's all about face
Yeah.
ultimately, but there it is.
Well, Zelensky openly threatening this victory day with a terrorist attack.
Yeah.
Do you think he's serious? Or he got emboldened by
You
this
can
deal
never.
or something?
Well, who knows? I mean, I would say something about Zelensky makes lots of threats at various times. It's difficult to overlook this because, I mean, he sometimes acted on these threats,
Mm,
but, he makes threats constantly. I think outside the small circle of people like myself who spend hours of time every day following this war, it's difficult to convey what an extraordinary individual Zelensky is, or
mm,
how uninhibited he has become. I mean, as you probably know, about a week ago, a Russian general was killed by a bomb
yeah.
in Russia. And he had a meeting, Zelensky afterwards had a meeting with his intelligence chiefs in which they quite openly admitted that they did it and they were gloating about it. I mean, in a way that, frankly, I found ugly.
Yeah.
but he does this. I'm afraid you can't assume that he won't do it. He's the sort of individual who does make threats, and sometimes he acts on those threats. I think it would be an act of insanity to do this. In the sense that, I mean, look who's going to be there. I mean, Xi
Yes.
Jinping's going to be there, Lula's going to be there. All of these people are going to be there. I mean, a terrorist attack on this parade at that time, I mean, all that's going to do is turn all of these countries completely against Ukraine. The other thing is, I'm sure the Russians are going to take every conceivable security precaution to prevent it. But I'm afraid Zelensky is now angry enough and mad enough and feels empowered enough because whatever he does, however unattractively he behaves,
Mhm.
he knows the Europeans especially will be there for him.
Yeah.
I mean, look, just to say, he turns up to the Pope's funeral
Mhm.
in battle gear. I mean, who does that? I mean, he doesn't wear a suit or tie to go to a
Mhm.
funeral. I mean, but anyway, and nobody even comments about this anymore.
Mhm.
So, anyway, it's not impossible that he will try something. The Russians are going to take this extremely seriously
Mhm.
by now.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will succeed because I think security is going to be so tight that it won't be possible for it to succeed, at least not in Moscow. But there is a real possibility that the Ukrainians could try something else in some other places, drone attacks on other cities, or who knows what.
I mean, I know it's he probably just threatening with no real plan to do it, but it's still very unsettled. Just like you
Oh,
said, there who's going to be there? There's a lot of leaders who are
yeah,
going to be there, and God knows if something happens. I don't know. I mean, we could
yeah.
potentially talking about World War. I don't know. It's just
Well, he probably hopes that this will frighten away the leaders from going.
uh-huh.
I
Okay.
mean, that's possibly
Uh-huh.
one of the calculations behind this. I mean, that hasn't happened, by the way. I mean, Modi isn't going because he's got this crisis with Pakistan to worry about, but nobody else has pulled out. But there we go. That's Zelensky. And to my mind, it shows that this particular leader is not fit to be the leader of a major country. To me, this is obvious. It was obvious a long time ago.
There was a while they were talking about to change him, right? That Trump wanted election, and Putin also want Ukraine to have election. But there's not much talking about that anymore. So he is safe for now. What's happened there?
Yeah, I talked about this quite a lot when it was first discussed, and I said that I thought that by now, removing Zelensky from power is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, his weakest point was in the spring of last year. Since then, he's carried out an effective purge of the political system in Ukraine. I mean, his major political opponent, Poroshenko, is sanctioned and facing a 15-year sentence. Other political leaders have been picked off as well. It's very difficult to see that they can mount a political challenge. And beyond that, Zelensky has the backing of the security services in Ukraine and of the various militias. And of course, he's got the backing of the Europeans as well. So I think that moving him out, getting him out of power, would be extraordinarily difficult now. I mean, the only way it can happen is if the Russian army arrives in Ukraine and basically, boots him out, and that would change things. But for the moment, it is very difficult to see how he can lose control.
And maybe that's why J.D. Vance just stated that Russia's war with Ukraine will not end anytime soon. I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Vance has been consistently the most realistic person about this conflict in the West.
Okay. The negotiation with Iran. So Trump threatens now sanctions on countries that buy oil from Iran. Now there's still negotiation going on. When he says that, does it mean the negotiation already collapsed without anybody admit that? But it's already collapsed. Is that right?
It's an excellent question. I don't know, because all of the information until a few days ago, not just from the Americans this time, from the Iranians as well, was that it was going well. And suddenly Trump comes up with this astonishing Truth Social post. It might be about Iran, but I'm going to tell you what I actually think. I think that it's basically about China. Remember what I always say, everything ultimately comes down to China. This is what the American political class is obsessed with. And China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. The tariffs have not caused the Chinese to back down and bow before Trump. So now he thinks he can scare them by threatening them with secondary tariffs that he's going to impose on Iranian oil. I mean, it's childish, but I mean, it's the kind of way in which the US increasingly behaves, behaved even before Trump became president.
So they want to use Iran as the excuse to punish China, right? Because they know China. Okay, but doesn't also give us a little bit of signal that the negotiation doesn't go very well? Because if it goes well, you can't use that as an excuse, right? You can't sanction Iran if you achieve something.
Quite true. I mean, it's also no doubt a way of putting pressure on Iran. But the Iranians are not going to succumb to that pressure either. They didn't before. There's no reason to think that they will again. In fact, one of the iron rules of negotiating with Iran is that the more pressure you put on Iran, the harder the Iranian position becomes. So it's completely counterproductive. I mean, Trump tried his maximum pressure campaign on Iran before, when Iran was much more isolated than it is today. And those days, Iran was in very bad relations with Saudi Arabia, and it was not, of course, yet a member of the BRICS. I mean, if it didn't work then, it is far less likely to work now. So why even try?
Now, regarding the since it's all about China. So the latest, we did get some information that China is evaluating U.S. offer to negotiate tariffs. China just said our door is open. So now the message we got is the U.S. has been trying, apparently through different channels, to contact China to get some kind of a negotiation start running, I guess. And to the degree now, China is saying, okay, we can evaluate, but there is no promise. What's your take on that?
I think that the Chinese will eventually agree to negotiations, but if I was them in this situation from a position of advantage, I would let the Americans sweat. And if you want me to tell you why I think we got that extraordinary, intemperate, angry comment, which, as I said, on the surface was about Iran, but I think was ultimately directed at China. I suspect that's partly the reason that Trump is furious that the Chinese don't just quickly say, oh, look, we're going to rush and negotiate with the Americans, whenever the Americans want us to. If the Americans say, we want to talk, we will immediately rush and talk. Probably that was what Trump expected. So he's very, very angry, and he's taking it out in this Truth Social post. But as I said, if I was China, that is what I would do. I would let the Americans sweat. I would give it a week or two, and I would say to the Americans, look, okay, we see that you want to talk. If you want to put forward some proposals, we'll look at them. And then after we've looked at those proposals, if we think those proposals are even worth discussing, then we might actually consider a meeting. But I certainly wouldn't rush into anything. And I get the impression that the Chinese are not rushing into anything either. I've dealt with Americans, by the way, in negotiations. This sort of bluster and threats and all of that, very typical of the way Americans do conduct negotiations. And as I said, the best tactic is to play it cool and to string it along. And I think that's exactly what China is doing.
I think fundamentally the problem with Trump, problem by large with America is they do lost trust with not just China, but Russia, Iran. I think fundamentally that's all the problem. For example, if they say to the Russians, oh, we're not going to let Ukraine to get into NATO, what kind of guarantee do you have, right? You say it now, I mean, you change your mind tomorrow, and maybe the next administration, why would Russia believe you? The same thing with, oh, we're going to lift a sanction on you, Iran, if you do this and that. Again, you can turn around and just saying, forget about it. We, change our mind. The same thing with China. We talk about this, right? There are so many times that China actually did give in and compromise and buying more and this and to show that China is serious. But then again, they make no promise, or they make promise and broke it the day after, whatever, what have you. I think fundamentally, when the trust is broken, it is very hard to move forward. Don't you think?
You're absolutely correct. Yeah, I mean, what you say is it puts the finger on why there is this great crisis in international relations, because at the center of international relations is a very powerful country which always breaks its word. Yeah. I mean, you're in every single case that you've described, you've described the problem exactly correct. The Russians do not trust American promises that Ukraine will not enter NATO in the future, especially when European newspapers, are saying that an American official, who's probably General Kellogg, told the Ukrainians, "Oh, don't worry, we can agree this now, but the next administration will probably change its position anyway on this." So, which of course the Russians are reading, and of course they know all about the whole promises about not expanding NATO eastwards that were made in the past. You're absolutely right about Iran. I mean, the Iranians made all kinds of deals with the United States. There was the JCPOA. There were the promise to lift sanctions. None of those promises were in fact honored. And with China, well, I mean, you know the history better than I do, but even I know how many promises were made and not honored. And perhaps the most important one, the promises that were made about Taiwan, about reducing arms deliveries and all of that to Taiwan, and about the one China policy, which it is now quite clear American politicians, political leaders don't believe in. So what are you going to do? I mean, how can you negotiate and come to agreements with such a country? And it is incredibly difficult and very, very all but impossible, given the power of the United States.
Britain, there is quite a few visits from the high-level officials. Just this year, January, there's Rachel Reeves, and she's the consular something, and then the energy secretary, Ed Miliband, he visited in March, and then Admiral Tony Radkin, he just visited in April, right? So, and then there's also discussion. Apparently, Starmer is considering to visit China later this year. Is there a shift for Britain towards China?
Yes, there is, but I mean, it's done not so much without conviction, but without any real idea or plan. So these are all very important people. So Rachel Reeves, I mean, we have this archaic constitution in Britain with all these pompous titles. So her title is Chancellor of the Exchequer. She's the finance minister.
Okay.
She is Britain's finance minister. Ed Miliband is the energy secretary, but his major job is to organize the green transition, the transition towards green energy. I should say Britain has massive energy problems. I mean, we're short of every conceivable kind of energy, but he is particularly focused on green energy, and of course, which is the leading country in green technology. It is, of course, China. And Tony Radakin is the head of the British Army. So all of these people are coming to Beijing. They all, at some level, understand that a relationship with China is important for Britain. I've discussed this many times. You remember, I've just talked about this in many programs, that Britain has a massive crisis of solvency. We have no money to invest in anything. The country that could do it conceivably is China. That was what the Cameron government sort of understood. That is why we had that so-called golden age of good relations between Britain and China. And then, of course, we threw it all away because, you know, we're going to have global Britain, we're going to ally with the Americans, and we're going to send battleships to the Asia-Pacific region. We're, by the way, again sending battleships to the Asia-Pacific region. Half our Navy, 4 ships. 4 ships. that's what the British Navy now is. It's 8 ships altogether, and we're sending 4 of them. So that's really going to scare the Chinese. Anyway, being serious. We threw it all away, and there's some understanding that maybe we should reconsider and we should revive it. But nobody really has a plan how to do it. Nobody is coming to China and say, look, these are our industries. This is where we would like investment. This is what that investment might produce. This is how you might profit from it. Nobody's doing this because nobody thinks like that in Britain anymore.
Okay, so they're only thinking, okay, we're going to visit China, and possibly even Starmer himself will visit China without knowing exactly what they are going to do or discuss in details with China what they want, right? So
exactly.
Okay. Well, that's I don't know. How can you?
Well, it sounds absurd and almost funny. And from a Chinese point of view, it is funny because I live in Britain, and to me, it isn't funny at all. It's very concerning. But I mean, if you track this government closely, this British government closely, what you very quickly discover is that they don't have a plan. At least not a plan for Britain. And that's the other thing they're going to do, at least probably not Rachel Reeves and Ed Miliband. Of that group, by the way, Ed Miliband is by far the most intelligent and capable, and perhaps the only one who could conceivably engage China in the kind of discussion that I've talked about. Not that he will, because he's under considerable political pressure in Britain. But Radakin and Starmer, I can absolutely guarantee to you that the main topic they will want to discuss with China is Ukraine. That's what they will want to come, and they will say, "Yeah, why are you sending arms to Russia? Why are you supporting the Russians in doing all this terrible thing with Ukraine?" And the Chinese will say, "Well, we're not sending arms to Russia." And then the British will get very cross and very angry, and then they will say, "Well, you should put pressure on the Russians," and all of that kind of thing. And I mean, that is more likely, I'm afraid, what they're going to end up talking about. Is Starmer never stops talking about Ukraine.
So you don't think there's a possibility that Britain can even consider to join the Belt and Road Initiative? You don't think so?
I would love to think so. I don't know. I don't believe it. I mean, I can't see any evidence of it. At the moment, Starmer is focused, our prime minister is focused on getting a free trade agreement with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he knows if he joined the Belt and Road Initiative, Britain joined the Belt and Road Initiative, that wouldn't happen. So I don't think he's going to do it. One thing he might be thinking, and it's a very, very bad and dishonest thing if it is what he's thinking, is that he might come to China, say that Britain is interested in joining the Belt and Road Initiative, and then run off to the Americans and say, "Look, give me that free trade agreement, because if you don't, I'll go with the Chinese." In other words, he might take a very manipulative approach, which you should never do. It's one of the biggest mistakes people make in diplomacy, in thinking that if you can be manipulative, that will gain you advantages. It never does.
I would think since they don't have any idea how to work with China, just maybe join the Belt and Road Initiative is a good way to do it, because then China have a stake in this. So China would have their own view of how to proceed. What are the infrastructure projects? What are the things that China is interested in doing with Britain? Then you start having a plan of some sort, right? That you can start discussing and start moving forward, since you don't have any idea yourself. Don't you think?
Well, I cannot imagine any better way forward than what you've just suggested. But I know the British political class and the situation here in Britain. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, just to say, powerful sections of the British political class are extremely hostile to China. The idea of joining the Belt and Road Initiative, of getting Chinese to start building our infrastructure, it would drive some people who are already borderline insane, completely insane here. And I'm afraid they've got traction. They carry political weight.
Yeah, you're right. Because when I'm reading some articles talking about the British and China relations, there's always this line that how to balance, human rights and with, development. They're still talking about things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Hong Kong, and come on, I mean.
Yes, I know. Well, and those are the politer people. I mean, if you read somebody like Ian Duncan Smith, who was the former leader of the Conservative Party, I mean, his views about China are from a comic strip. I mean, they are ridiculous. I mean, they are. I mean, well, I'm not going to use the word about a fellow Briton, but I mean, they are absurd. I was going to use a very, very much stronger word. And, if he was the only one, it wouldn't matter. But unfortunately, there's a very, very wide opinion within the British political elite which shares those kind of views. Not, by the way, against the British people. There is a large Chinese community here in Britain, and I'm sure you've heard a great deal about the tensions between British people and immigrants. It never ever directs itself against Chinese people. They're never bracketed with other immigrants in that kind of way. British people like Chinese people, and I mean, they get on with them at many levels. But anyway, there it is.
Last question. So Canada now had the last time we talked that we were saying that the Mark Carney is expected to win. So now he won, and the Liberals now in control again, continue to be in control. So what's happened next to Canada? Because now it seems like Canada has a bad relationship with the U.S. So what's next for Canada?
Well, I mean, the logical and obvious thing to do is that given that Canada has a very bad relationship with the United States, it should look for other relationships and other friendships with other countries. Russia, which is, of course, a neighbor. You always forget that, but Russia is a neighbor of Canada and has many shared interests with Canada. And historically, the two countries have had cordial relations. China, of course, as well, with which Canada had once upon a time excellent relations. I mean, that is what Canada ought to do. I don't. There's a ghost of a chance of it happening. I just don't believe it. I mean, I know Mark Carney quite well. I mean, he was the governor of the Bank of England here. He was very, very political governor of the Bank of England. And he is somebody who shares all the conventional views that you expect from people of the political class. So yes, Trump is very bad. Tariffs are very bad. China is even worse. Russia is worse still. And I don't think he's able to transcend that. And I'm sorry to say this, I think we're going to get more of the same in Canada and the more worse decay. I gather conditions in Canada are not very good, and they're just going to go on getting worse because I again don't see any real sign that anyone within the political class in Canada is capable of turning things around or of thinking differently.
I actually want to ask you about Britain again. You're saying there are forces within Britain don't like, they just hate China, I guess. Of course, there are forces within Britain also very much hate Russia. So the only country they like is United States, right? But this free trade agreement, has been going on for quite some years now, that even back in Johnson's time, he wanted to have this free trade with the United States. Is it going to happen then, realistically?
You put your finger on it again. You're doing a lot in this program, can I just say? One of the great absurdities is that the British, there's a section of the British political class which is intensely pro-American. When I say a section, I mean 80% of it, 90% of it. And they are convinced that because they speak English and the Americans speak English, there's some tremendous connection between Britain and the United States, and that the Americans value them and that they're Anglophile in that kind of way. I have to say that is not my own experience of America. I think that there is a fair amount of hostility to Britain in America for all kinds of good and bad reasons. So that's the first thing to say, much more than I think British people appreciate. I think that America and Britain are profoundly different from each other to a degree that, again, the British political class just does not understand. And I think the American political system and the political class don't think much about Britain at all. The idea that Donald Trump has any great anxiety to agree a free trade agreement with Britain is ridiculous. I mean, Britain isn't that important for him. I mean, he's got much more important places that he's thinking about. Greenland is more important to him than Britain is. I mean, it may be difficult for British people to understand, but it's true.
Yeah, we will see. When will Britain realize that they're not, the Americans are not that fond of them? So, okay. All right. So let's talk next week. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.